Today we're going to learn how to convert video game models for use inside of Substance Painter and Cinema 4D to create cool fan art like these Doom renders. Hey there, it's Luis Miranda. So lately, I've been getting really into making these Doom renders using actual in-game models. What's great about this is that these models come with really intricate rigs for animation and with some pretty decent textures, so I'm able to pose them however I want, including controlling their face. And I also have a really good base to start with when I go into Substance Painter and start texturing. So this process is going to require Blender to work. It is 100% free, so there's absolutely no reason to download. Also, the plugin that we're going to be using for it, there's no equivalent for it on Cinema 4D or anything, so we have to use Blender. But because Blender is free and also extremely powerful in its own merits, I highly recommend just getting it and exploring it outside of this tutorial. So I'm going to walk you through the process of installing the plugin, and then we'll hop into Substance and also Cinema 4D and get these things going. All right, let's get started. Before we get started, it would help me a lot if you subscribe to this channel and hit the bell icon so you can get notified every time I upload a new tutorial. I'm also on Instagram under Luis Miranda 4D, where I post a lot of renders, many of which become future tutorials. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is find a model you want to work with. So the thing that we're going to be looking for are these things called XPS models. So this particular person, her name is Blink Jisoo XPS. Her entire page is just her converting these video game models into this XPS format. So I want to explain a little bit about what XPS is. So when you play video games, there's these things called skins. You can usually download them and, pay money for those things. However, before DLC was a thing, and even now, people used to mod their character. So they would extract the model, grab the UVs, the textures, and then they would modify it and then re-upload it into the game as a mod. And then they would see this character that they customized themselves in the game. So people still do that, but also people continued doing this whole XPS process to create fan art, all that good stuff. So what I would say to you is I do want to give you a word of warning for a couple of things. These models come from video games, and so they're not necessarily put out there so that people can just source them and put them into their commercial work. All of this has to be done as non-commercial fan art, sort of just for the love of doing it. And so when you source these guys, do not use them in any sort of commercial work. Do not try to make money off of them, because these are not really up for sale. These are all provided by people who are essentially volunteering their time to convert these over so that people can actually access them and look at how the geometry is made, how the textures are laid out, all that good stuff. So don't use it for commercial work. Okay, cool. Secondly, because these are kind of open for people to do whatever they want, you are going to run into a certain thing, which I unfortunately have to notify you about. If I were to look up the word XPS inside of DeviantArt here, a lot of the models that are going to appear are going to get you fired from work. So do not do this at work, because as people like to do with anything that involves any sort of creativity on their part, sometimes people like to do things that are a little, pornographic, for lack of a better word. Okay, so just be careful about that. I would highly recommend just going straight to certain pages, and looking up XPS on their own is fine. But if you find people like this lady, I just put her on my watch list, and I just go directly to her profile, and I don't have to deal with sorting through those unsightly models. So, but if that's something you want to check out that on your own time, cool. But here in this particular person's profile, she has some pretty awesome models, some of which are pretty new. So you can see that you have some Dragon Ball Z. You also have Half-Life Alyx, but some of the ones that were very much of interest to me were these Doom Eternal ones. And so if we go over here and look at her ports, and we click here, see all, we now have access to all of these really awesome models. So yeah, you even have the Icon of Sin, which is like the last, like the big boss battle at the end, and also a lot of weapons. But yeah, essentially what I did was went through these, found all the models that I like. So you can see my Pain Elemental here, Arachnotron here, all these guys. But if you keep going, you can see for different video games as well. So if you're into Star Wars, here's some cool Star Wars models, Dragon Ball Z, yeah, all sorts of stuff. Unfortunately, this particular user does not make these anymore. If they're on her profile, it says that she has retired from doing XPS models. So you may need to do a little bit more searching to find other providers of these type of models so that you can, find a much more higher variety of them. So let's go ahead and choose one. For this particular case, I'm going to download about 3, and I'm going to show you 3 different models that you're going to come across, some of which require you to do a little bit more work, and others require a ton more work, and others don't require work at all. You just basically download them and they're good to go. So let's go ahead and find a model that you like. I'm just going to go ahead and go back to her entire list. Let's look at something like, actually, you know what? I'm gonna download this shotgun because I do need it. Okay, so all you have to do is just pretty much hit this download button, and you're gonna get a zip file that has all the model. So here, when we open up our WinRAR, let's make sure we get rid of this little bit. Cool, and open up the Super Shotgun. You're gonna see all the textures, and you're also gonna see these files that say xps.xps, generic item mesh, and this bunch of ASCII in there. So those are going to be really important because those are what a Blender needs. We're going to need to download this XPS tool 2.0.0 for Blender 2.8. So Blender 2.8 is the newest version of Blender, and that's the one that had a ton of new updates. It gave you a much more easier to use interface. It kind of feels a little bit more like cinema. It also has like a real-time viewer, all sorts of cool stuff. But we just really need it for this conversion here. So definitely download this guy. Go down here. If you're looking for any of these links, they're down in the description. And so come down here to this download. You can use any one of these links. I like to use Dropbox personally. So when you open up the Dropbox, you can download this guy. So what you want to do is hit download here, and you're going to want to use this last one, this XNA LoRa mesh. Cool. Okay, so once you install Blender, this is going to be what you see at first. And I've already kind of customized my startup scene. It normally has a cube and a camera and a light, I believe. So I just got rid of that because I hardly use it for that. I just bring in the models, and then they're pretty much in Substance or in Cinema immediately after. So if you click away, okay, so the first thing we need to do is install that XNA. So we go over here to our edit, and then here to preferences. We then go here to add-ons. And what you want to do is click on this install. So you want to find where you installed it. You want to extract the zip file from that main source one and just have it on its own, but don't unzip that one because you want to install it as a zip file. So when you click this guy, as you notice, there's a zip file. You go ahead, hit install add-on, and down here you can see a little thing that says it's been installed, you're good to go. So now if you look for XNA, you can see that this guy is here. You definitely want to make sure that it's active. So just go ahead and hit that check mark. You can also check for any sort of update, but I don't need to do that. And yeah, we're pretty much good to go. So you might need to restart Blender. And so just go ahead and do that. It doesn't take very long. And so now the next thing you want to do is go over here to your file and go to import. And down here, there's this XNA XPS. And so you want to hit this guy right here, which is your .ascii.mesh.xps. So as you can notice, I have a lot of recents because I've been doing these a lot lately. So I'm going to open up the Cyber Demon. So here in our XPS, let's go ahead and click that guy and import. So it'll kind of do its little thing. It'll convert the XPS into something that Blender can see. And as you can see, there's this model here. This is our Cyber Demon. Cool, and you can kind of notice that there's like these lines here, and that's actually our joints. So that's the rig that I was talking about. Cool, so all you have to do now is go over here to File, and hit export and go over to FBX. And so now you can pretty much save it wherever. I'm gonna drop it in with my Cyber Demon. I'm gonna call this guy Cyber Demon. I'm gonna do it O2 because I already have an FBX that I've used. And then you just hit export. Cool. And at this point, we can pretty much just say goodbye to Blender. So thank you for helping us out, Blender. I wish I could use you more. Okay, so now that I've converted the model, I'm inside of Cinema 4D. I'm inside of my UV edit mode. This way we can look at the UVs of this model. And we can also see that there's this really cool, skeleton rig for this guy. As you notice, I'm using a different model. I'm using this Arachnotron, but it's because I want to show you something that you're probably going to come across and how you're going to want to fix it, essentially. So with this guy, actually, let me deactivate my joint so that we don't have to deal with all those lines. Cool. Okay, so with this guy, when I click on any one of these meshes that come with the model, you can see here that in the UVs, it's all nice and unwrapped. You can see everything is packed in there. And pretty much if your model immediately shows that, you're pretty much good to go. All you have to do is now process the textures, and you can even import that FBX directly into Substance. However, you will come across certain models that require a little bit more work to get them to work. And unfortunately, it is very time consuming, and it's going to require some extra work on your part. So let's go ahead and hop into this one, the Revenant. So super awesome model. I love this character. He's super creepy. I really worked hard to get this guy to work because if you notice, none of these UVs are appearing over here. So let's go ahead and zoom out. And let's keep zooming out. Let's keep zooming out. And here you can see this little island is where the UVs are. And why does that? I have no idea. I think it has something to do with the game engine that it was made in. So inside of, I think it's called ID Tech 6 or 7, one of those two. Originally, they used to have this thing called a mega texture, I believe. And it's just this giant texture where you just drop in everything. And basically it uses UDIMs. If you don't know what UDIMs are, is that this guy right here is a single tile. A UDIM is additional tiles that are up and to the right of it. And so they have these different coordinates. And so you should say tile 1, 2, 3. It's going to become a little bit more important inside of Substance. But in this particular case, I don't think there is a UDIM tile that is recognized over here. So this guy is just in the middle of nowhere, and you have to kind of adjust it yourself. So using your UV tools, you can pretty much just go ahead and select all of this stuff. As you can see, it takes a little bit. And so now you switch over to your move tool, and then you can slide this guy down. Okay. And so, yeah, you have to place it. But also, this is not enough because there's a certain position that you have to put them in. Otherwise, it's going to be completely disjointed. You're going to have to slide things around, and it's just not going to look right. So what I would recommend is here on File, you want to go to Open Texture. So let's go ahead and find our Revenant. So here in our Revenant, we have these textures. So here we can find the head, which is what this guy is. You can see the eyes. You can see it's all lit up over here. So let's go ahead and select the diffuse. This way we can see where we're placing it. So now you can see it back there. And if you notice, there's also a transparency to it, which is also something that we're going to have to fix using Photoshop and stuff. So here you just basically want to line this guy up so that it looks correct. What I like to do is find things that are circular, because you can pretty much just put it right in the middle and everything will be pretty much where it needs to be. So the eyeballs are pretty much the most round thing. You can also use this the nose essentially. So let's go ahead and move it. And once you do that, you have to click on this guy right here, which saves your UV. So you basically have to then do this to all of them. Just keep zooming out. move this guy over to this tile, you bring in the texture that's supposed to be using it, and then lining it up with that. It's very time consuming. I've tried to find any way I can to line it up automatically for me, but it's just you're kind of stuck doing this, unfortunately. So if there's a certain model that you want to do and it requires you to do this is kind of the process you're gonna have to go through. So I was doing the main character of Doom. He's like, you know, the main character, so he has a lot of textures, a lot of different parts, and hit all of his like objects had these crazy UVs, and they're just all over the place, and I had to fix each one individually, and it took a while, and it's not fun. If you don't want to do all that, just go ahead and find a model like this Arachnotron, which already has everything centered, and you don't have to worry about anything at that point. All you have to do is import it into Substance, and we can start working, you know. So keep that in mind when working. Cool. All right, so now we need to go into the next step. So this part is a little bit more technical. It actually took me a little bit to figure out what was actually going on. So if you noticed in the Revenant example, there was a lot of transparency in that texture. We're not supposed to have that, because when you import it, it actually will show transparency, especially inside of Substance even, because it does respect the alpha, and so it'll basically just be this hole that it's going to be seen through. So let me go ahead and import a texture so you can see what it looks like. I'm currently using Affinity Photo. I'm going to show you how to do it inside of Photoshop as well, but I found that Affinity is actually a lot easier to work in, specifically for this task. So I'm going to use Revenant as the example because he tends to have a lot of textures sort of within each one that you get. And so I'm going to need to explain to you what that is, but let me just bring one in. So here we have the diffuse channel. So this is all the color. But if you notice, there's all this transparency going on. And that's because there is something hidden inside of the alpha channel. And it's actually a texture that we can use when texturing. But also we need to get rid of it so that our programs can actually see this texture correctly. So let me explain to you what's going on here. So if we go over here to our channels, which is down here, you can now look at each channel individually for the red, green, and blue. So if we look at red, green, blue, together they all combine to create the colors that we're seeing in the final. But here in our alpha, we can now see this really strange looking texture. And if you've been using 3D for a while, this should look pretty familiar to you. This should either look like a displacement map, or it might actually be a specular map. So if you don't know what a specular map is, essentially it controls like the reflections, but this is kind of an older way of working. It's not the new sort of PBR, physically based rendering. This is from before we made that big change. So this one you would just load into the specular channel, but now we have things like roughness, metalness, all that good stuff. But that's not to say that this is not useful. We can definitely use this for various different applications. So let's go ahead and fix this particular texture. So I'm over here in my channels, and this one actually gives you the ability to view each one individually, but just clicking them. You can also just activate them. So as soon as I remove the alpha, you can actually see how it's supposed to look. It's completely opaque. The colors are very vibrant. So if I switch back and forth, there's like a very clear difference between the two. So how do we fix this? That's the main question. Because even when I deactivate this particular guy right here, it doesn't export like that. It will export with the alpha. So what I found is, so if you come down to these extra channels down here, this is the channels specifically for the texture. So if I were to click on these, you can't really switch to them or anything, but what you can do is right click on them. So if we go here to our background alpha, right click, and here what we can do is create a grayscale layer. It will then extract that data and turn it into a black and white layer. And that's perfect because in 3D, a lot of textures are black and white. So now we have both of these guys. So that's really cool. But we still have the issue of this guy having the transparency. So what you want to do here is right click on the background alpha, and then now you can hit fill. And it'll fill with whatever color you have here. You want to fill it with white. So you can go here to fill, and it fills it. So now you have the specular on its own and also the diffuse on its own. And so now you can just export these individually. This one's your diffuse, and this guy is your specular. Cool. And if you notice, this is going to be on pretty much all of your textures. So keep that in mind. If you see any sort of like transparency, it basically means that they have hidden these different textures inside of the alpha channel. And this is referred to as texture packing. It is something that video game developers do. It comes from them trying to save as much space as possible. So if you have 3 different textures, each one of them is going to weigh a certain amount in terms of file size. But if you combine all of them, they will only be the size of one texture. So what they do is that they grab black and white textures like a specular, roughness, metal, and then they make them certain colors. And then they blend them all together using the add blending mode. And inside of their video game engine, they can actually extract data from the red, green, and blue channels. And also they can extract it from the alpha channel. You can also do this inside of Redshift, and I believe also in Octane by using a channel splitter. But unfortunately, Substance Painter does not do that. So we're going to have to do the work for it by taking care of it inside of these photo editing applications. Okay, so now we're going to do the same thing we did with this texture inside of Photoshop. So if you don't have Affinity and are more of a Photoshop user, here's how you do it inside of Photoshop. I'm not really a loyalist on either side. You can use whatever you want. Personally, I like to own software that doesn't require a subscription. So Affinity was a good choice for me because it's like $25 or something like that. So super cheap and you get to keep it forever. So, but if you only use Photoshop, this is the way you do it. Okay, so here we have the same issue. There's a couple of ways you can do it. There's the quick and easy way is to go over here to your channels and then right click and go here to split channels. And basically what it'll do is it'll split everything and it'll turn your transparency into its own layer. So that's one way of doing it, but let me actually have to reopen everything. Okay, so that's one way of doing it, but you lose the color information because it gets split out. Then you have to like recombine them, and that's kind of a pain. So what I'm gonna do instead, I'm gonna go over here to my layer, and then I'm gonna do layer mask, and then I'm select from transparency. And so now it creates this layer mask that has all of that transparency data. So I'm gonna deactivate this guy. And what I'm gonna do is create a new layer. This guy's just gonna be empty. And I'm gonna alt click on my mask. And so now it makes it active. And then I'm gonna hit Control A or Command A if you're on a Mac. And then from there, everything is selected. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit Control C to copy. Then on this new layer, I'm gonna hit Control V. And so now it places it inside of that layer on its own. And so if we deactivate it, we still have the issue that our alpha is looking kind of ugly. So what we can do is right click on this guy and just delete the layer mask. And so now you have both the information that's hidden inside the transparency and the RGB channels split, but not split into all sorts of different channels. You just have RGB on one layer and then alpha on one. Okay, so now that they're both separated, what you want to do is select both of your layers and then right click and go over here to export as. And here it gives you the option to export both of them as individual images. So go ahead and export those. So make sure that one of them is labeled as specular and the other one as your diffuse. Cool. So I'm back in Infinity and I'm going to show you that all of the textures actually have this sort of data. So let's go ahead and bring in more. I'm going to bring in the normal channel. So when we bring in the normal, this one also has an alpha channel. And if I were to bring this into Substance, this would like not look right because all this transparency, the normals, which just look really weird. We need that like that nice purple color. So doing the same thing, we can go ahead and extract the grayscale values of the alpha, and then again by selecting it, we can then fill it. And so now we have a normal looking normal map. And here we have our, I'm not really sure what this one is. This one kind of looks like a roughness. I also kind of think that it could be repurposed as a subsurface scattering um, channel, because if you notice where the bone is located, it's like really thick. But then the areas where there's a lot of muscle, it's a little bit has a lot of variety. So you can actually tell whichever one of your render engines to use this particular map as your subsurface scattering, and it'll actually give you a pretty good looking result. All right, now let's bring in the next one, which is our E channel, which I believe stands for emission. And so here, let's go ahead and check out what's inside of this alpha. It doesn't really seem to have much, but let's go ahead and just extract. And again, let's go ahead and fill. So make sure you activate all your channels so everything looks right. And let's see what we got. Cool. So yeah, this one, I'm not really sure why it's called E, but this one seems like it's the opposite of the normal one. So if we kind of hop back and forth, this one definitely could be used as like a roughness or even metallic. You can see here that where the metal is, there's a lot of black. That's how you can tell that if it's for the metal channel. And also because it has those like speckly bits, it shows that certain parts aren't going to appear as metal. They're going to appear more dull. Cool. So yeah, if you do this for all of your textures, you can actually extract around 2 textures from each. So you have your normal and you have the alpha of the normal. With the emission, you can get your metal pass and also your just the emission itself. There's one in particular that I wanted to talk about, and that is the armor. The armor actually comes with this thing called an S. So I'm trying to figure out what the S stands for. So let's go ahead and click on our alpha. And here, this kind of looks like it's all the edges, and so it might actually just be what they call the curvature. But also this looks like a mask. So you can actually use this guy as a mask inside a substance. Yeah, so go ahead and extract all of these different layers using the techniques that I showed you. Some of them aren't going to be super obvious right away, so we're going to have to do a lot of testing. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and import our Revenant model. And so here, make sure you activate use UV tile workflow. It's brand new. It's included in the newest update. So it now lets you work with UDEMs without having to convert them into their own texture sets, which is really nice. And so you can actually paint across and it'll actually go from one to the next. Cool. And we don't really need to put anything here on the mesh map or mesh normal maps and bake maps for that. We're actually going to apply them manually. And I think it's because if I try to import them, they're not going to be named correctly. So it's just easier for us to drop it in. Okay, so now we're bringing in our Revenant. So yeah, the model looks okay, but it looks very sort of like soft and there's like no detail anywhere. And so something I want to tell you right now is that if you don't have the normal maps for this guy or for any model you download, I don't think it's going to be usable. You can try to paint all the details yourself if you want, loading up like a bunch of normals and stuff, but I just don't think it's gonna take you a really long time, because all that data is extracted from these really high poly versions of these. So some guy out there who's very talented made this Revenant using like really good modeling techniques, maybe even use ZBrush or even like CAD software to make like these cannons and the armor. And there's a lot of detail in there that you're just not going to be able to get from the geometry. And so they hide all that information in the normal channels because it's a lot easier to run a game when all the information is stored in images as opposed to the mesh itself. So yeah, so just make sure you have all those textures. Otherwise, you're just going to have a hard time. So now let me go ahead and bring in my textures. So I've already went ahead and converted all of them into, their diffuse, metal, normal, all that good stuff. So I'm just going to move it off to the side. I'm going to select all of them. And I'm going to import them in here. So I'm going to drop it into my shelf. It's really important you put it inside your project folder. It'll automatically get added to it, but I always like to go to it first. So here it'll give you all of your textures will show up. It's really important that here in your import your resources to, you set it to your project. So project PBR. Once you save it, it'll actually update to whatever you name it. Cool. And so make sure you select all of them. And here in undefined, make sure you put them as textures. So now you can hit import and you'll have all your different models. Okay, let's go ahead and scale this guy up. Cool. So now we have our UVs over here. So here's how I go about adding the normal channels. So let's go ahead and look. We can actually increase this over here and make it large. And normally what I would do is create a new layer and here in our fill layer, and then just drop it into our normal. However, there's an issue with this. Even though it does kind of create that effect that we're looking for, it's not the best idea. And let me tell you why. Because when we bake this model, it takes into consideration the normal maps. And so if you notice, there's a lot of detail inside of this normal. So if we were to bake it and it uses just the mesh to create like the curvature and find, all the data that we need to make these generators look really cool, it's going to completely ignore the normal information. But the normal information has all of the data from the high poly version. So it's kind of our in between. It can feed all the other mesh maps. So yeah, so definitely don't put it as a layer. So you want to do this instead. So I'm gonna go ahead and delete this fill layer, and I'm gonna go over here to my texture set settings. So I'm gonna shrink this guy down just a bit. Okay, so down here you have your mesh maps. And if you notice, we only have one of these, and that's the normal. And that's okay. We can go ahead and drop it in. So now when you have it in here, it's independent of any layer. And so when we bake this, it will now look at all of these little bumps and all that good stuff, and it will actually put it into consideration when we're calculating for curvature, for pretty much all the stuff that you see over here. So ambient occlusion, curvature, position, thickness, all that good stuff. So let's go ahead and do this for all the other layers. So here we got our head, and let's go ahead and drop in the head inside of normal map. And as you can see, he's looking pretty cool, really gnarly. Cool. And here is our armor. Let's go ahead and drop in the armor. Yeah, so it'll actually show up a lot faster if you kind of move the viewport. Cool. So yeah, you can see all this really cool detail on this guy. Cool. So I think that's pretty much all of it. So now what you want to do is bake your mesh. And you do that by doing those bake mesh maps here inside of your texture set settings. And here it's really important that you deactivate normal because it'll replace the normal that we just added. And also we don't have an ID map for this guy. This is really useful if you have like the main model. You can actually apply colors and stuff, but because we don't have that, we kind of have to make do with what we do have. And so here, ambient occlusion, definitely keep that. Curvature, position, all this is really good. Make sure your output size is set to something high. I like to put it at 4K so I have the best quality. And that's pretty much it. So all you have to do now is hit bake selected textures. So here it'll go through the process of baking everything. But if you notice, as it's creating it, you can kind of see the normal map affecting it. So you can see this one's not so much, but when you look at the normals, the ambient occlusion, it definitely takes into consideration that normal that we included in there. So here, as you can see, all of that detail is being preserved. Cool. So now we have all of our mesh maps that we'll need. So that includes our ambient occlusion and all that good stuff. But if you notice, everything took into consideration the normal that we included in there. I would show you what it looks like, but basically it just looks very sort of generic, very smooth. And here we have all these really cool details. And so it's really important to do that. All right, cool. So now that we have our normals and just everything, we can actually start painting this guy now. So let's go ahead and see what we got. So let's start with our guy here in the middle. So the armor. Let's switch over to our layers. And here you can see that I can paint directly on there. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a fill layer. And let's bring this guy up. So Here, what I'm going to do is deactivate normal because we already have a normal map. I'm going to keep metal. I'm going to keep roughness. I'm going to deactivate height. Actually, I did it opposite. Deactivate normal and deactivate height. So now we're only going to work inside of color, roughness, and metal. If you're unaware what these things are, essentially they're material. So let me show you. So here in our color, we can just change it and it updates the color. Simple enough. And our roughness is how rough our surface is. So let me actually make it a little easier to see. And here in our roughness, all the way at 0, it's very shiny, very glossy. And over here at the highest, it's very matted. You can't see any reflections. So somewhere in the middle, you kind of have like a nice sort of dull reflection, like a specular almost. So somewhere around here looks good, but then when you increase metallic, it gives it a nice metal look to it. And by playing around with the roughness, you can kind of make it look brushed or just like chrome. Cool. All right. So let's go ahead and build this shader really quickly. We're going to drop in our diffuse inside of our color. So now we got that. I'm going to go ahead and just kill the metallic down and just kind of bring in our roughness to somewhere in the middle. Cool. And so now what we want to do is look at what we can do with these all these different passes that we were able to extract from those packed textures. So here we have something that looks kind of like a roughness maybe. Let's go ahead and drop this guy into our roughness. And so a good way to tell is if you roll it across, which parts are shiny, which parts are not. And so the blood looks kind of, or actually I don't think that's blood, I think that's like rust. That one is definitely not shiny, but the area around it is sort of shiny. Let's actually increase the resolution on this guy. Let's go to something like 4K because we're working at 1K right now. Let's go ahead and bring it up to 4K. And it'll do the math. The textures that we actually get from the XPS file is actually 2K. So we're doing a little bit of uprising here. So the reason I bring them into Substance is to try to pack more detail into them so that it's not so obvious that they're low resolution. So in video games, you know, you'll usually see this guy like right here or something like that. And maybe you'll get into his face and like, you know, when you do that sort of animation where you like kill him really violently. But for the most part, you're kind of seeing him like away. So you don't really ever get up close and see all this stuff right here. And so that's where Substance Painter is really cool because we can actually add a lot of this detail and kind of cover up the fact that it's low res. Cool. So here we got like, it looks pretty good, the reflection here. Let's see, maybe we can drop this guy into our metal. Yeah, and this actually looks really good actually. And so this part right here, like this edge, it's supposed to be like wear. And yeah, you can see that it's the shiniest out of all of them. And then these over here have like a nice matted look to it. But there's a lot of variety in where what is metallic, what isn't. Cool. And so we have this last one, which I'm not entirely sure what this one does. Let's actually flip it and see if we drop this guy into our roughness. Yeah. Okay, so I need to explain something really quickly. So sometimes you'll get both maps. So if you notice, these are essentially the same, but they kind of look like they're inverted from one another. That's because there's two different ways of controlling the roughness, and that's either through a roughness pass or through a glossy pass. Glossiness is, I don't know what it uses it. I think it's more in the video game realm, but when it comes to like Cinema 4D, it uses roughness. But the only difference between the two is that one's inverted and the other one isn't. And that's really all it is. And you can actually fix it inside of Substance by just putting in an invert on that particular channel and you're good to go. But yeah, so if these guys look similar to you, but they're just inverted, that's probably why. Cool. So in this particular case, you want to decide if you want to use the roughness or the glossy. So it's up to you. All right, so let's go ahead and build the rest of the shaders. So I'm gonna go over here. This is the body. I'm gonna do the head first actually, because it has a little bit more interesting textures. Cool. All right, let's switch over to our layers. First, let's go ahead and increase the resolution to 4K. And let's switch over to our layers. Let's create a fill layer. And inside of our filler, let's go ahead and drop in our base color. We don't need to drop in the normal because we already have that. And here we can play around. We can figure out which one is the roughness. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at this guy. Let's put that into our roughness. So I would imagine the roughness would look like is that the muscle is kind of shiny because it's wet, kind of gross, but then the skull itself should be pretty dry. So let's see. Right now, yeah, the muscle definitely looks shiny. And over here, you don't see too much reflection. A good way to check your material is to go down to this drop down and go over here to roughness. You can kind of see what it's doing. Yeah, so the darker it is, the more shiny it is, and the more bright it is, the less shiny it is. So I think this one's actually backwards. So let's see what happens if we drop in this guy instead. Same thing. Let's go ahead and drop this guy. Oops. This guy is more about like the crevices. So I think that could be useful for something else. Okay, cool. So I think these guys are both glossy. And what we can do here is by clicking this layer, we can go ahead and click this little magic wand and select this thing called add levels. And here you can actually do a little bit of color correcting. So if you want to, play around with the colors, you can do that. That looks kind of cool. It looks a little bit like Darth Maul. But what you want to do in this particular case is instead of it being base color, we want to go down to roughness. So if we switch over to our roughness, we can see it in action. And so if you click this guy, which says invert, it'll invert it for us. And now we can actually adjust it so that it affects what we want it a little bit more. Cool. Let's see. Awesome. So now the skull will be a little bit more rough, and these muscly bits will be definitely a lot more shiny. So if we hit M on the keyboard, it'll switches over, and you can see super shine. And then over here, it's a little bit more dull. Cool. Yeah. All right. So another thing you can do is actually use one of these as your subsurface scattering, but it's really hard to demo that unless I'm inside of Cinema. So I'm not really gonna worry too much about that. Cool. All right, so now that we have like two pretty distinct parts, I would recommend just going ahead and doing that for the rest of the textures. Cool. So let's go ahead and start playing around with this guy. So on the head, I think it's probably the easiest to manipulate because it already has like muscle and bone exposed and all that good stuff. So if we go over here to our layers, we can actually start dropping in materials. So here in our materials, let's go ahead and pull these guys up. As you can see, I have a lot of materials already installed because I've been using this guy for so long. But if you want to install more yourself, you want to make sure that you have Substance Launcher installed, and it looks like this guy. And so here you have, it's pretty much just like the thing that opens up whenever any software opens. So like Cinema 4D or After Effects. But here you have this tab called Substance Source. And here, once you're logged into your account, you can actually look up any one of these materials. You can type in anything. So there's something like blood, which is going to be really useful. So you got blood there, you got blood spread. You can do all sorts of things. And so what I did with this guy is I set it so that when it downloads, it goes directly into Substance. Normally what it does is it goes into your downloads and then you have to drag it in. But if you want to know how I set that up, it's really simple. All you have to do is click on one of these materials and go here to your Show and Explore. So it brings this guy in. And if you notice, it's inside your documents, inside of algorithmic shelf materials. And so what I did is I put this path, I just copied it. And then over here, I went over here to your login information, and then inside of launcher settings, I just placed that inside of the download location. The problem you're gonna face at first is that when you download, it's just gonna be constantly downloading. So basically, Substance Launcher needs administrator access into your folder. So what you want to do is then find Substance Launcher. And then if you find the exe of it, you can right click and go here to Properties. And inside of here, you can actually go to Security. And now you can actually allow it to write. And so if you just go into Advanced or edit your permissions and give it write permissions, it'll then allow it to write inside of the documents folder. And so now everything that I download goes directly into the shelf, which is really convenient. So let's go ahead and download something just so I can demo it really quickly. So let's see, something like this guy. It's brand new, so I'm gonna hit download. So it's downloading. So now it's owned and now it's saved. And it's called Stylized Painted Damaged Wood. All right. Let's minimize that guy. And if I type in stylized, you can see it that it's loading up, and there it is. And so now I can just drag it in, and there you go. It's a very convenient way of working. It's really quick, and it just helps you, focus on what's important, and that's sourcing cool looking materials and then, applying them, painting, all that good stuff. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. Cool. All right. So in this particular case, I want to bring in some blood. And so we got the human blood, we got zombie meat. Let's do that. Well, it sounds cool, And so here we got this nasty looking guy. We can probably scale this down by holding down this transform box. Cool. All right. So we want to limit it to the muscly areas. So this is where things can get really interesting. So if we go into our project setting, inside of our head, you can see that some of these have really dark areas, and they have really bright and also dark areas. So we can actually use that as a mask. So if we go over here to our layer and we select this guy right here, which is a square with a circle, which is I think the same in Photoshop, which is a layer mask. You can go down here to add white mask, black mask, all that good stuff. But if you select this one that says add bitmap mask, you can then select that. And here you can then choose which bitmap you want to use. So I'm going to just type in head, and let's find the one that looks the most contrasty. Yeah, this one looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and add it. And if you notice, it's kind of limiting it to the areas where it's black. And if you want to see it, when you move it, you can kind of see that it's affecting it, but it's not super overt. Cool. And another thing you can do is here on our fill, we can add a levels. In this guy, we can play around with it. You can see it's affecting the mask. And so now it's kind of it's making the muscly bits a lot more juicy and gross looking. It's also kind of having that effect on our eye, unfortunately, but everywhere else that it should be, it is appearing on, and I'm super okay with that. So what we need to do is just isolate this thing and tell it to not affect that. And it's pretty easy. All you have to do is, while clicking on your mask, just go over here and go to add paint. And then you can actually just paint it off. But there's a smarter way of doing it. If you go over here to your left side, you have this brush, you have the eraser, you have this thing which is a projection. But underneath that, it looks like a little polygon or like a triangle. And so now you can actually select polygons and say which one you want it to affect. Well, first you need to hit X to swap between adding and subtracting. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract. And so now you can see it'll remove it if I drag it over. But there's something even smarter you can do, which is this one right here, which is our UV island mode. And here, as soon as you drag it onto one of these islands, it'll completely wipe it from there. And so if you notice, on, off. So yeah, this can be really useful because certain parts of the model are actually separated as their own piece. So like the eye is its own little island. So you can just drag it on that and it's completely isolated. Sometimes you might find something where the arm is separate, but the armor on it is its own thing. So then you can start applying certain materials specifically to that armor piece versus the arm itself, and you don't have to paint it. You just have to select the polygons where it belongs. Cool. All right. So, but the issue that happens is that it gives you all these really ugly red lines. So you definitely want to switch back to your brush tool, and there you go. Cool. So yeah, we got this nice sort of layer of grossness. It's pretty cool. If you want to play around with it, if you click on the main layer, you have access to all these things over here. So you can actually change the color of the blood. It's going to take a little bit because we're running at 4K, but you can see. And if you want to make it more similar to the color underneath, there's a good way to do that. I would just deactivate the layer so that it reveals this guy underneath. And over here in your material dropdown, if you go to base color, it'll reveal the color itself. So now when you select this guy, the blood color, you can then select your dropper and come over here, maybe select like the brightest red you can find, press OK, and now you activate it. You can see it and it looks a little bit more closely like the original. And if you hit M, it'll switch you back. Cool. So let's see what happens when we increase some of these settings. So this is blood crust. Yeah, it kind of gives it that nice like creepy look. It looks kind of crusty, you know, it's like it's been out in the sun for a while. Let's keep increasing it. Yeah, it's super gross. Awesome. Yeah, so you want to do something like that. That's an option. I'm going to drop it down just a tiny bit. Cool. So now we have nice variation, but also when we get up close to this guy holds up in 4K. And so that's something that you weren't really getting before. So here you can kind of see like the sort of like the softness of the image from it being low res. But then when you add this, it sort of gives it like additional layers on top of it, then kind of makes it a little bit more convincing. We still have to deal with the bone because this guy's still low res. So let's go ahead and fix that. So inside of our materials, you can actually pull up a bone material and drop it on that guy. All right, cool. So now we have this nice bone material. If we adjust it, we can get a little bit more resolution, make it less stretched out. Cool. I would put this underneath the zombie meat. And so now you can see that it's underneath it, but it's still kind of overpowering the original layer. So we can actually copy this mask. So if we right click on it, and then we just do copy mask, which is down here. And on the bone, we can now apply a white mask and then right click on it and then paste into mask. So basically it's just the same thing. It's being isolated to the muscly bits, but because we did some adjustment to it, we can adjust it ourselves. So if we hit invert, it'll now be on the opposite. And so we can see it now where the bone is. Cool. And also because we painted out the eyeball, we don't have to paint that again. Cool. So you can see. So yeah, now it looks a little bit better up close. You still have some of the details from underneath because the normals still kind of get respected. So things kind of layer on top of each other. Cool. So this guy also has its own amount of control. You can make this guy a little bit more white if you want. Yeah, so he kind of has more of a ghostly look if you want that. If you want to make him really ridiculous, you can give it like a red. Kind of make him look a little bloody, you know? Let's see what blue does. Yeah, it looks weird. Cool. So yeah, so the mask isn't completely covering that, and I'm okay with that, but if you want to see how your mask looks, you can go here to mask, and here we can then play around with our levels, and you can see it getting adjusted. So if you really wanted to show it, or if you still want to have a little bit of gradation on it, and here you can play around with this bit. I think having it a little bit more clamped like this is a good way to control it. Cool. So let's hit M. We can see what we got. I'm going to go ahead and put this guy back to something a little bit more reasonable. Something like here. Cool. And you also have the option to give it color for the blood. So if we increase that, we can see what happens. Yeah, this guy works a lot faster if you have it at a lower resolution, but because I want to be up close to this guy's face, I definitely want to be able to see all these little details. And so you can see that there's now an additional layer of blood. And so yeah, if we are to deactivate these two layers and just look at the normal, just how it was before, and then we bring it back in, it's just like way more detail. And I think that's really cool. And so if you do that to pretty much your entire model, it'll look something like this. So as you can see, I went through here and added a whole lot of details, especially on the metal part of it. And so here you can see that I've added a couple of materials like that has these like nice hexagons, a little bit of damage. I even tried adding my own blood to it, stuff like that. And with this guy, you know, I kind of try to bring some more resolution to him. Overall, cool. So here's a couple of things that I also want to talk about before we wrap this guy up. Is here in our iron damaged. So if we turn it off and on, oops. I'm actually going to go low res so that I can show you this a little faster. So I'm going to go down to 1K. All right, so let's go ahead and rotate the thing. Okay, so here we have our iron damage. As you can see, it comes on and off. So if we click on our mask, this is just a painting mask, so I can actually go in here and just paint it myself. But there's some really cool brushes that you can use. So obviously you can use the ones that are all built in. You can even import Photoshop brushes if you want to like paint it yourself. You know, you can kind of do that. But what I like to do is use these particle brushes, and these guys are ridiculously awesome. So here we have this fire bit. So you can do that, and then it'll just create a lot of particles, and it'll move through the model really organically. But then you also have like stuff like electric lines, which will, so here when you paint it, it creates these nice little lines if you're trying to get like that techie look. But the one that I've been using a lot was this laser impact. And so, yeah, it just looks like it's hitting the top, and it just kind of gets blasted, and it's just move across for a bit. Another one that's really cool, this one works really well for blood, is if you do like leaks. And so this one just drips down. So that's really cool. This one would look really cool on his face to reveal more blood. Let's see what else. We can do rain, or actually puddle is probably a better one. So it just starts dropping a bunch of particles, and these ones will actually start pulling up together and create like little areas where, you know, there's puddles. So yeah, you got a lot of options to customize this and give it a little bit more of an organic look without having to hand paint everything yourself. Because I know that a lot of us aren't necessarily painters, and we don't necessarily use these tools to paint. We use them more to produce these like really cool results from, you know, all the different materials and blending them together. So here's a couple more tips that I want to show you guys, which I think are really cool. So I'm going to go ahead and deactivate a lot of these, and I'm just going to leave the original layer. So now we have just the original, nothing new, nothing fancy. We just have the original layer. And so here I'm going to create something like a new material. Let's do something really obvious so you guys can see what's actually happening. We're going to do this orange color here. I'm going to deactivate a couple things. I'm going to deactivate the normal. I don't really need all that. Yeah, cool. All right, so it's super obnoxious, super bright. It looks like he's like some sort of Lamborghini or something. I don't know. Let me kind of bring in a little bit more resolution so it doesn't look so pixelated. Cool. All right, so now on our material, what I like to do is create a mask. So this white mask doesn't really do anything. It's still there. You can paint inside of it if you want. Let me actually go to my brushes, select, and then you can actually start painting it if you want. But I don't like doing that. The whole reason we use the baking is so that we have all this new information that was given to us, and that's like the curvature, ambient occlusion, all that good stuff. So if you go over here to your little wand again, and you hit this guy that says generator, you now have the option to add a generator in here. And this right here is really powerful. So something like metal edge wear is probably one of my favorites. And what it does is that it combines your ambient occlusion. It also combines your curvature so that you can create nice little edges on your object. All of this material, this golden sort of garish looking thing, is being isolated to these edges and also to like these little cavities. And here you have all these different options to play around with. So you can increase it, and it gives you like these like scratchy sort of looks. You can increase the contrast or lower it so that you have a little bit more sort of gradation between the sort of like the extremes and the lows. And here in the grunge, you can actually increase how much grunge is in here, but you can also increase the grunge scale or lower it. I like to lowering it so that it looks a little bit more streaky, kind of affects a bigger area. You can also do the edge smoothness, which kind of just blurs it out a little bit. And here, your ambient occlusion, you can use it so that anything that's inside a cavity, you can remove it or you can pack it in there. So you can make it so that dirt is accumulating in there. And also your curvature, you can lower it. Basically, it creates a contrast. Cool. So that's just one of them. You still have the option to do something like dripping the rust. This one's really cool. So here we have, it looks pretty similar, but when you increase the rust and then also increase the drips, you can have this really interesting like dripping effect. So it looks like, you know, it's been rained on and it's just falling down, which looks really cool. You can increase the spread, like the smoothness, kind of just blurs it really. Same thing with the drips amount, like the drip smoothness is the same thing. I like it kind of sharp so you can kind of see the like the little streaks. Cool. All right, so there's another one that I like, which is dirt. This one, it pretty much just uses the cavities and kind of packs it all inside of those cavities. And this one's really fun because if you want to give little details on the inside of these like little bits, you can just do it this way. So yeah, you can just kind of leave it. It comes out of them. You can create the contrast. Same thing, grunge. You kind of get the idea. They're all pretty much built off of the same sort of tools, but the only way they work is if you have those mesh maps from when we baked it. So all these ones that have like 1 on it, just telling you that it's on UV tile 1. But yeah, if you go in here and you were to remove these, so like remove curvature, it breaks the entire effect. Same thing with ambient occlusion. Those two things are like really important, and they're just completely gone now. So, but if you bring them back, it has a lot more information to work with, and it can create these really cool effects. Okay, last thing that I want to show you, something that I really like, and this one is what is called a filter. So inside of filters, you can do a lot of really cool effects. You can do stuff like peeling paint on it, and it gives you that look. You can also do rust weathering, which will just make it look like it's rusty. But one that I think you might want to definitely check out is this one called Detail Edge Wear. And this one works with your normal map. So here you're creating a lot of these little sort of edge effects and stuff like that. But if you paint a lot of things on your normal, it's not going to get affected in the same way that like actual geometry will. But if you bring this guy in, it'll actually affect the normal stamps that you use. So let me give you an example. I'm gonna go ahead and drop this guy on top. It's gonna create its own layer. And if you can see here, it's kind of affecting this normal here, but I'm gonna do something so that it's a little easier for you guys to see. I'm gonna create a new layer, which is just this like brush, and this is a pixel layer. It's different from a fill layer. Cool. And so now I'm going to deactivate that guy. I'm gonna go over here to my heart surfaces, and here we can choose any one of these normals. And this way we can stamp it and it looks cool. So inside of our brush, we want to go down here to our alpha. Let's get something that's circular, like this guy is good. What we want to do is drop it inside of our normal. So down here, select normal, drop it into the normal. All right, so now when we click, we can stamp. We are in pressure sensitivity mode, so I'm going to go ahead and deactivate it. So now we can create that. Cool. I also don't want the color information. I just want the normal. I'm going to bring this guy a little bit smaller and stamp it. And see how there's kind of like this grime on top of it? If I were to deactivate this metal edge wear, it just goes away. And that's because you can see it here. Let me actually increase the resolution because it's kind of getting a little muddy. All right, so here you can see that there's that stamp that I just put in. If I post it over here, we can see another stamp. And so now when you activate this metal edge wear, it'll actually look at the curvature of these normal stamps, and then it will actually treat it similarly to the metal edge wear, but it'll do it to the normals. So that's, I think, really cool, and it's really powerful, and can definitely help you customize this even further, because now what I can do is bring in something like this cross, drop it in, and then I can stamp it, and now it has that little, all that weird detail around it. You can make it even bigger, something obnoxiously big, and see you have all that detail around it. And it looks super cool, I think. So yeah, that's yeah, when you do that, you can pretty much make these things look really awesome. So let's go ahead and prepare this for export. Okay, so the way to export this thing is you can go either here to file and then go down to export textures. And this is a fine way of doing it. If you're in Redshift, it actually already has a Redshift material. You only have to do is hit Redshift. This also works for Octane. They use pretty much the same textures. They use roughness, metal, all that good stuff. But if you're using standard render, you just want to use the basic metallic roughness, which is this guy right here, PBR metallic roughness. But I don't use any of this because since I use Redshift, I have access to this really cool plugin. It's called, let's go over here. It's called XOLSP Link. It stands for Substance Painter Link. And you can basically just send all this stuff over to Redshift. It already knows that it's Cinema 4D because Cinema 4D is already open. And yeah, you can tell it where you want to save it. You can put its output path. And then I'm actually going to set it up so I can show you how easy it is. So here you can choose everything you need. So if I select all textures, I can do that. I could also export the geometry, but because we already have the geometry loaded up, we don't need to worry about that. And so let's go ahead and bring in the FBX. Cool. So here we got this guy. And I'm going to switch over to my normal startup. Sweet. So you can see them down here, but they're not named the same. So they're just going to create 3 new ones, but it's okay. We can replace it. Cool. So now all I have to do is go here to create. And yeah, you just give it a little bit of time and you'll start to notice that it's going to get exported over to Cinema 4D. Cool. So as you can see, I have 3 new materials here and it's named after head, body, and armor. And if we look back at substance, you can see that it's done doing its thing. So now it's basically compiling our shader inside of Cinema. So it's bringing in all the textures, and it's linking it up all for us. So let's give it a little bit more time so that we can see the thumbnail. Okay, so now all of them are brought over. You can see the textures are loaded up. And so I can just drop it in onto each part. And so now you can see that it's all brought over. Let me actually do something. Let's go over here to editor and let's put this at 2K. This way we can actually see the details. So now when we work at 2K inside the viewport, you can see that that cross is there. You can see all of the weird sort of like edge wear on the normals exists. Yeah. So yeah, so now basically if you look at our material here in our edit shader graph, you can see that it's all pretty much set up for us. It brought in the base color, roughness, metallic, all that, and linked it up for us. So we don't have to do any work to make this guy work. So that's really awesome and really convenient. And also this plugin is like $25. So there's absolutely no reason not to get it, especially if you're going to be working in either Octane, Redshift, or Arnold. It just builds it for you. Super easy. Highly recommend. Check it out. Cool. All right. So now we can pretty much just activate our armature, which is our joint system. I deactivated it so that we don't see the joints, but here we can actually, if I hit right click and unfold all, we can see all of these guys and we can adjust them. So I haven't actually gone in and added any sort of goals or pivots, all that stuff. I mostly just do FK, which is you do the rotation. And I know that maybe some people might be tempted to rig it. And if you are good at that sort of thing, you should definitely do that. Because quite honestly, if you want to do this for animation, like you have all of this available to you and it's like super easy to do. So if you grab the arm, I can then hit rotation, start moving it around, and I can pose them however I want. So this guy doesn't really have a very intricate face, but some of them actually have their entire face rigged. So you can actually adjust their like eyebrows, their faces. You can actually, do some actual character animation with it. And yeah, all of this stuff is just like built in because it's from a video game and video games do that stuff. So yeah. And so here you can actually play around with it. And so yeah, you can see the possibilities that all this stuff grants you, because you can pretty much move everything about them and do some really cool stuff. So yeah, it's a pretty extensive process to get these to work, but I think the result at the end is definitely worth it. A lot of you have been asking me on how I've been making these, and so that's pretty much what I do every single time I open one of these. And so for Revenant, the guy that we were just painting, that guy was a giant pain in the ass to do. Like fixing all those UVs and all that stuff, like it really sucked. Other models are like that too. So like the main character, the Doomslayer dude, he also has something ridiculous like that, and he has way more stuff on his body, and it makes me a lot more appreciative of the games that I'm playing, because just seeing the amount of work that these people put in just so that this one model can run good and also look good and also save space so that your hard drive isn't downloading terabytes of data just to play this one game. So yeah, I really hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial / walkthrough on how I go through preparing these models. So yeah, if you guys can definitely give it a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Definitely check out my Instagram, where I'm going to continue making new renders. I'm probably going to continue doing a little bit more of these character models and converting them over and doing some cool like homage type stuff. I'm trying to think of what video game series to do next. I'm thinking maybe doing some villains of different ones, but I definitely want to get back to doing like my own type of art. So yeah, if you guys have any suggestions, definitely drop down in the comments, or even on Instagram, just comment on my latest post and let me know what you think. All right, so that was the entire tutorial. So I hope you enjoyed it. All right, I'll see you guys later.